Hello people of the future and happy new year. I'm recording this in December of 2024, and today I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Jusant, a game all about climbing and more importantly, all about the feelings that it evokes. Before we get into that, however, I did want to take a minute to point out that this is going to be a more regular thing on the channel, smaller game reviews like this, as well as more regular bigger ones as well. You can also look forward to, at some point, those cornerstone retrospective style videos. I recently did one just last year, or this year if you're me now, for Alien Isolation. A 2-hour video that spent a lot of time with the plot, the gameplay, and pretty much anything else in between that I felt might be interesting. If you have any ideas of what I should do next with that series, I do kind of have the next one planned out, but I'm always taking suggestions in that regard. Now, as for Jusant, or however French people would pronounce it, Jusant or something, I don't know. This is coming from Don't Nod. This is a very smaller experience. Comes in at $24.99 US, and you can play it on Xbox Game Pass. And for me, I completed that game in just under 6 hours. A little more than 5.5. And that's not completing everything, but that's taking in as much of the game as I absolutely could without looking up any sort of guide. You may know the developers Don't Nod from games like the original Life is Strange, or even more recently, that one game Banisher's Ghost of New Eden. And one thing that Jusant does have in common with these games is it's a very emotional journey, not in this instance as a tearjerker per se. However, these devs have a really good grasp on what it means to evoke player emotion. In this game, it's done entirely visually and through its gameplay itself. There is no dialogue within the game, and to some that may be a turnoff. But much like games like Rime, or one of my favorites, Abzu, it's very much a game about the journey that you're taking. However, this time, unlike Abzu, the game does challenge you somewhat with its gameplay, and it's not just something that feels entirely on rails. Normally, with my videos, I get into each of the 4 categories. However, for this one, I'm going to take things to a little higher view because I feel like that's all you need to understand what makes Jusant great. So first off, we have the story or the narrative. There is a story here, and I feel like once you've completed the first section of the game, you're going to kind of guess what happens, or at least guess what's going on. Because with no dialogue, it's not always super clear exactly what our main character's motivation is. The only thing you know pretty much right off the rip is that we have a seemingly fairly experienced climber already, evidenced by plenty of gear, whether it be the poncho, the climbing boots, the gloves, or even the already attached rope system that we have. It's really cool to step into the shoes of someone that seemingly already knows exactly what they're doing and what they need to do. Now, story presentation comes in a couple of different ways. Obviously, there are cutscenes throughout the course of the game, and really their main point is to kind of show you the next objective, to kind of guide you in a certain way. However, there are some plot details that do play out through cutscenes, and that's cool too. Another way you're going to get some narrative is through the notes within the game. And while a tide, to play into the game's narrative, is an ebb and a flow, I have to say that quality does that too, or at the very least, pacing. I am not a fan of the notes within this game. I thought they were very boring. The font to the notes within the game is even very boring. There are some plot lines to follow here, and I'm not going to say it's worthless, and they may even feed heavier into the themes of the game. But I'll be quite frank, across the 6 chapters within the game, after chapter 1, maybe halfway through chapter 2 realistically, I went and I looked for the notes from a completionist standpoint, and even a challenge of trying to get to everything. However, I did not read them. And in that way, if that disappoints you, and as far as this review goes, I'm sorry, I really am. My parents have been trying to get me to read more for years, but it's not going to happen with Jusant. I believe the pacing is affected by these notes, and quite frankly, there's just so much more cool things to see outside of these notes. Now, it did, in the notes that I read, leave a little bit of, curiosity to me. Some of the names, because what it shows is that this obelisk, this giant tower that we're climbing, made out of rock throughout the course of this game, is home to many generations worth of different cities and towns that kind of developed as the water slowly went away. So as the water levels went down, more towns were built around the surface of the water, or the water level. It's a really interesting premise, and some of the city names and stuff like that are really cool, but what these notes do is, in my opinion, the cardinal sin. They give you all of these hard to grasp terms when you're not exactly seeing what they mean. You know, maybe if you were in a certain town always when you were finding notes about a specific one, or seeing a piece of technology that seems unique to this world right in front of the note, it would make more sense, but that's not always the case. I do, however, think it's worth noting that the main aspect of the narrative to me is that player emotion that I already talked about. I don't think it's for nothing that the quote-unquote vibes of this game are nearly immaculate. The gameplay puts you in somewhat high-stress scenarios at times, with that stamina meter going down as you try to manage and balance your way up a rock wall, and that rush of dopamine as you finally get to the top of a high ledge. It really does a lot to how the player feels. And that's not even to mention the fact that you are going to be going through plenty of abandoned towns that have long been lost to time, seeing people's businesses left in ruin, and it really puts into perspective just how differently these characters' lives could have gone. Not to mention, this game does one of the coolest little bits of audio that I think I've ever seen in a game, and in my opinion should have went tenfold into this element instead of putting so much into all of these notes that you're finding around. And that's that there's these seashells that you can pick up throughout the journey, and they're going to, as you listen in, instead of just hearing the ocean waves, which you very much do, you also see the wind chimes, and you actually hear their sound, whereas right now they're silent. And it breathes so much life into this environment, you know, as you can hear people playing at the docks, or children running around. It just adds so much to that feeling of despair, in my opinion, as you, on the inverse of this, are making your way up this mountain for a reason that I won't spoil, but I think it becomes pretty clear as you complete the objectives moving your way up it. And it's that juxtaposition of those two emotions that give a greater feeling, or in my opinion, a greater message of hope. There's no other way to say it, that despite all challenges that you face throughout the course of the game, there is a responsibility for your perseverance, a reason to carry on, and it only becomes stronger the further along you get and the more reason you see to continue your journey. And that, to me, is apparent even without reading the notes of the game. Now, I've talked about challenges throughout the course of this game, and it all comes down to the gameplay. It's fairly simple. Playing with a controller, your left and right triggers are your hands as you move your way up the mountain. You'll have to manage a stamina meter, as well as you have a couple different braces that you can kind of pseudo-save yourself from falling. You know, once you get past a really tough section, you can kind of anchor yourself in, and you can't fall all the way to the bottom of that climb. And in that way, I think the game is very forgiving. Even actually falling in this game isn't that bad. You're pretty much locked down to, you can't lose any more progress than the current climb you're on. And that does actually come as a bit of a letdown for me. This doesn't need to be getting over it with Bennett Foddy, where you could lose hours of progress by falling down. But hell, you can't even walk over a ledge in this game without being stuck by an invisible wall. That in and of itself isn't terrible, but it really does ruin a lot of the illusion that as we get higher up, things are starting to get dangerous. This also comes at the cost that some of these invisible walls, you might find your character getting stuck all the time. And that's, in my experience, I would just be walking along a wall trying to find, the perfect place to go, and I'd just get stuck for a minute. Usually letting the player kind of sit and relax, and then, maybe jumping or trying to leave that specific spot would work. However, it was a huge annoyance that did persist throughout the entirety of the game. And I've got to say, the variety of gameplay within Jusant is paced rather perfectly. The tutorial of the game kind of introduces you to the core mechanics, climbing directly on walls, swinging on your rope, even jumping, and different things like that. But what I like about it is that you're not really getting a lot of new gear. As I mentioned earlier, it feels like you're a seasoned climber already. Rather, a lot of the tutorials and the, upgrades to your arsenal come simply from the fact that you eventually learn how to do all these things that you could always do. You learn how to properly jump, even kind of run up a wall, double jump a little higher, and things like that. Now, of course, there are environmental things that you can take advantage of. For instance, these rock bugs that climb on the wall, you can cling on to one and they'll carry you further than you could ever go. Or even when the really heavy winds, you have to wait until they're blowing in the right direction to get a really long jump. Stuff like that to me is so cool. And again, it really feeds into that idea that you could always do what you need to do. You start the game with all tools available to you. You just need to know what to do in the right scenario. And that to me feels great. Otherwise, with the gameplay, I didn't really have any problems. I thought the collectibles in the game were very, very cool. I'm not talking about the notes, where you can use your little water guy friend, who's featured in the trailers and in my gameplay here, to kind of light things up around the world in a really cool way. Very Breath of the Wild look with that light blue lighting. And he is a water-based creature that kind of is able to grow some of the environments around you, and you're kind of bringing plant life back. You got to think everything's so starved for water since it's grown up there that it's really cool to see just exactly the impact that Ballast, the character, does have on the world. And the pacing doesn't just stop with the gameplay there either. Another way that the gameplay does feel diversified is that with each of the chapters, each of the major environments and kind of, I don't want to say biomes, but biomes within the game, they all fall into that same very beautiful art style. It's hard to describe. It's almost minimalist in a way, but a lot of these environments do get very detailed as well. Whether it be the coral-covered caves, just obviously the sandy rock kind of outer bottom layer, and then even some of the green growth that begins as you make your way higher up. There's plenty of visual treats to feast your eyes on. The same goes for the music within the game. Another shout out I would kind of make is that it's very similar to Abzu, that game I mentioned earlier. I don't know if there was a clear inspiration or anything there, but to me it feels very much adjacent to that experience. The best thing I can say is that there is a reason that they do sell the soundtrack to this game. It's that good. It's something that peacefully I could listen to, and I'll probably try to include some of those songs within the background of this video. But okay, that is my time with Jusant. I'm going to try not to get to a fraction of the gameplay length here by making a long video, so thank you for watching. I really don't know what else to say. I mean, if you like that style of game, that vibey, atmospheric game, I think you're going to love this. I think there are shortcomings in my humble opinion, and if the developers ever see it, I would present the notes and their level of interestingness, that's not a word, as well as other stuff like getting stuck on invisible walls. But overall, I really did like Jusant. I wouldn't say I loved it, but for Game Pass, I definitely recommend it. And for $24.99, I don't know. That's a tough one for me personally, because if you don't know you're going to love it, I wouldn't recommend it. But I would definitely pick it up when it goes on sale. Regardless though, thank you guys for watching this video. Consider subscribing and stay tuned for hopefully a lot more.